The encryption pattern appeared on Lieutenant Kira Aldridge's monitor at 02:47 hours on a Tuesday morning in September, 3 weeks before everything exploded. She was alone in the communications center at Fort Sentinel Peak, New Mexico, running what was supposed to be a routine security audit of the base's network infrastructure. 24 years old, MIT, computer science degree collecting dust in a drawer somewhere, and she was about to stumble onto something that would define the rest of her career. The traffic shouldn't have been there. Military channels, encrypted with personal protocols, timestamps that didn't match any authorized communication schedule. Kira pulled up the packet analysis, her fingers moving across the keyboard with the kind of muscle memory that came from spending 4 years in Cambridge learning how networks thought, how they breathed, how they lied. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb. The name appeared in the metadata like a signature on a confession. 3 unauthorized connections in the past hour alone, all routed through base infrastructure to a private server somewhere off the grid. And he wasn't alone. 2 other names, Corporal Tyler Cross, Specialist Jason Wade. A pattern emerging from the digital noise like a face in fog. Kira created a new folder on her encrypted personal drive, labeled it with nothing but a date and a string of random characters. Started documenting everything: screenshots, packet captures, metadata extraction, timeline reconstruction, the kind of evidence that would hold up in federal court if it ever came to that. And somewhere in the back of her mind, trained by years of watching her 3 older brothers cover their tracks, she knew it would come to that. By dawn, she had 6 hours of data. By the end of the first week, she had mapped a network that made her stomach turn. Encrypted messages sent every time a female officer requested a transfer. Traffic spikes that coincided with harassment complaints filed through official channels. A digital footprint of something organized, methodical, protected. 3 weeks of watching, 3 weeks of building a case that nobody had asked her to build. Because that was the thing about being a communications officer that the officer candidate school instructors never quite explained. Sometimes the most important messages are the ones people are trying to hide. Major Kenneth Hartley dismissed her grid redesign with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was 14:30 hours on a Thursday afternoon, 18 days into Kira's private investigation, and she just presented a communication infrastructure overhaul that would improve base efficiency by 18%. "Nice work, Lieutenant," Hartley said, his voice carrying that particular tone of condescension that certain field-grade officers reserved for junior personnel they didn't take seriously. Nice work for a female officer. Kira felt her jaw tighten, kept her expression neutral. Professional. She'd learned that skill early, growing up the only daughter in a family of 4 kids, learning when to push back and when to document everything and wait for the right moment. "Sir, the efficiency improvements apply regardless of the gender of the person implementing them." Hartley waved a hand. Of course, of course. Just saying it's good to see the women officers contributing, even if it's just communication systems. Just communication systems. As if the entire operational capability of a modern military installation didn't run on the infrastructure she maintained. As if encrypted traffic and network security weren't the backbone of everything from logistics to combat operations. As if she hadn't spent 4 years at one of the best technical universities in the world, learning exactly how to make complex systems work. She left his office with the same professional smile she'd walked in with. But the folder on her encrypted drive had just gained a new section. Because men like Hartley, men who dismissed expertise based on chromosomes, were exactly the kind of men who miss things, important things, criminal things. Chief Warrant Officer Daniel Blackwood arrived at Fort Sentinel Peak on a Monday morning with paperwork that said climate assessment and intentions that said something else entirely. 42 years old, Navy SEAL background, counterintelligence specialist with a reputation for finding problems that command structures preferred to ignore. He'd been sent by the Deputy Inspector General after a pattern emerged in the data that someone in Washington actually bothered to analyze. 7 female officers transferred out of Fort Sentinel Peak in the past 18 months. 7 women who'd filed harassment complaints that went nowhere, investigated by the same field-grade officer, closed within 72 hours with the same 2-word conclusion: insufficient evidence. The deputy IG had looked at those numbers and seen a problem. Blackwood looked at those numbers and saw a system working exactly as designed, just not the system anyone wanted to acknowledge existed. He spent his first 6 days mapping the base like he was planning an assault operation. Camera dead zones, shift change patterns, where the enlisted personnel gathered, where the officers avoided, the places where visibility dropped and vulnerability spiked. Every installation had them. Most commanders ignored them. Blackwood documented them. On day 6, he started installing modifications, small encrypted devices embedded in the standard issue communication equipment assigned to 6 female officers he'd identified as potential targets based on the pattern analysis. Emergency triggers that would send a silent alert directly to his phone. The kind of modification that shouldn't be necessary on American soil, in an American military installation, among American soldiers sworn to protect each other. But necessity and should rarely aligned in Blackwood's experience. Kira noticed the reactivated camera on day 17 of her investigation. She was doing her own reconnaissance, mapping the blind spots where Webb and his crew seemed to operate, and there it was, a maintenance corridor camera that had been marked as broken in the system logs, but was very clearly functioning. The indicator light was off, but the lens assembly had that particular sheen of recent cleaning, and when she checked the network traffic, there it was. Live feed, recording continuously, hidden in plain sight. Someone else was watching. Someone with the technical knowledge to reactivate surveillance equipment without filing the proper maintenance requests or notifying base security. Someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. Kira pulled up the access logs. The reactivation had been authorized through a federal override code, Deputy Inspector General level clearance, which meant this wasn't just a base issue anymore. This was an investigation with weight behind it. She encrypted a report that night, routed it through 3 different secure channels before it landed where it needed to land, laid out everything she'd found: the unauthorized server traffic, the pattern-matching female transfer requests, the 3 primary actors she'd identified, the timeline that stretched back 5 years based on archived server logs she'd pulled from backup systems that IT thought had been decommissioned. The response came back in less than 4 hours. 3 words: continue, document everything. No signature. But Kira knew bureaucratic authorization when she saw it. Someone in the federal chain of command wanted this case built airtight before anyone made a move. And that someone had just deputized a 24-year-old communications officer who was supposed to be worried about radio frequencies and satellite uplinks, not federal conspiracy cases. She worked late that night, pulled every piece of data she could justify accessing with her security clearance, built a network diagram that would make a prosecutor weep with joy, identified administrative access points that shouldn't exist on military servers, traced IP addresses across 7 different installations in the Southwest region, found patterns that suggested this wasn't 3 guys at Fort Sentinel Peak. This was infrastructure, organization, protection at levels that made her hands shake when she understood the implications. By 0400 hours, she had something that looked less like evidence and more like an indictment. She backed it up on 3 different encrypted drives, stored them in 3 different locations, because people who built systems this elaborate didn't let them get dismantled without a fight. Day 19, Kira made her decision. She was going to force their hand. Professional confrontation, that was how she'd frame it, would also expose Webb and his crew to direct confrontation in a location she'd carefully chosen was just tactical advantage. She approached Webb in the commissary at 1800 hours, Public enough that he couldn't just ignore her. Private enough that his instincts would push him toward aggression instead of de-escalation. Kyler Cross was there. Jason Wade, the whole crew. Perfect. Staff Sergeant Webb, I need to discuss some irregularities in the communication logs. Webb looked up from his meal. His expression shifted through surprise to calculation in less than a second. He was smart. That made him more dangerous. Lieutenant, this about the grid redesign? This is about unauthorized encrypted traffic on military channels. 3 users. Your credentials appear prominently in the access logs. The temperature in the room dropped. Cross and Wade both stopped eating. Webb's jaw worked for a moment, processing, deciding. That's a serious accusation, ma'am. It's an observation. I'm documenting irregularities for the communications security audit. Standard procedure. Maybe we should discuss this somewhere more private. There it was, the push toward isolation, the move she'd been waiting for. I agree. Maintenance Corridor B, Building 7, 23:30 hours. We can review the logs there. Webb's eyes narrowed, but he nodded, because men like Webb, men who'd been operating in the shadows for years, they always thought they had control. They always thought they knew how to handle a problem. They were always wrong. Kira spent the next 5 hours preparing. She reactivated 2 more cameras in the maintenance corridor, ran diagnostic checks on the emergency trigger embedded in her communication device, improved the self-defense training she'd received at OCS, knowing full well that technique and size weren't equivalent and she'd need backup if this went physical. But she also knew Blackwood was watching, had been watching for days. The reactivated camera was his signature. The federal override codes were his authority. He'd be there, not to rescue her, to document, to provide the federal presence that would turn this from a base disciplinary issue into something that couldn't be buried. At 23:15 hours, she walked into the maintenance corridor. Low lighting, older infrastructure, the kind of area where surveillance equipment malfunctioned with suspicious regularity. Except now, 3 cameras were recording in 4K clarity, and somewhere off-site, Blackwood's encrypted phone was receiving a live feed. Webb arrived at 23:25 hours. Cross and Wade flanking him. The corridor had one entrance, and they'd positioned themselves to block it. Tactical, practiced, not their first time. Lieutenant Aldridge, you wanted to talk about communication logs. Kira kept her voice level. Professional. I wanted to discuss the unauthorized server access. 3 weeks of encrypted traffic routed through military infrastructure to an off-grid location. That's a violation of about 16 different regulations. Webb smiled. It wasn't friendly. You think you're smart, correcting us in front of the major, making us look bad, showing off that MIT degree. Cross moved to fully block the exit. Wade pulled out his phone, started recording. They'd done this before. The realization hit Kira like ice water. This was rehearsed, refined, a pattern they'd perfected on other targets. I'm doing my job, Staff Sergeant. If that makes you look bad, perhaps you should examine your own behavior. Wrong thing to say. Strategically brilliant, tactically dangerous. Webb grabbed her wrist, slammed her communication device against the concrete wall. The impact jarred up her arm, but she didn't pull back. Didn't fight. Just looked directly at the camera she'd reactivated 4 days ago and pressed the emergency trigger with her other hand. You need to learn respect, Webb said, and you need to learn the definition of assault under Article 120. Wade laughed. Who's going to believe you? New lieutenant, no friends, no credibility. Cameras are down, just like always. Just like last time, Cross added. Just like last time. The phrase confirmed everything. This wasn't impulse. This was protocol. They'd done this before to other women in this exact location, and they thought they'd get away with it again. 90 seconds after Kira pressed the trigger, footsteps echoed from the far end of the corridor. Controlled, measured, not running, walking with the kind of confidence that came from knowing the tactical situation was already won. Step away now. The voice wasn't loud, didn't need to be. Command presence wasn't about volume. It was about certainty. 3 heads turned. Blackwood stood in the doorway, backlit by the corridor lighting, and his expression carried the weight of 2 decades of operations where hesitation meant death. Webb released Kira's wrist but didn't step back. His calculation was obvious. Unknown senior warrant officer, Navy, not Army, outside his chain of command. Maybe this could still be controlled. "This is a private conversation, sir." "Chief warrant officer," Blackwood corrected. "Navy, not your chain of command. Which is why I'm the perfect person to observe potential Article 120 violation in progress." "Article 120 is sexual assault," Webb said. "Nobody's assaulting anybody." "Article 120 covers sexual harassment, assault, and related offenses. But we can clarify definitions at legal review if you'd prefer." Kira had moved 3 steps back, closer to Blackwood. Her wrist was throbbing, but she kept her voice steady. "They've been following me for 3 weeks, always in camera dead zones." "Prove it," Wade said. Blackwood pulled out his phone, turned the screen toward them. "Live feed, current hallway, perfect clarity. Camera's been active for 72 hours, recording continuously, full audio, full video. I have about 11 minutes of footage from tonight alone, starting with the wrist grab." "Would you like me to continue?" Webb's face went white. "That's illegal. You can't just—" "Base security authorized surveillance reactivation under Command Climate Investigation Authority," Blackwood interrupted. "Signed by the Deputy Inspector General 6 days ago. Any other legal theories you'd like to workshop?" Footsteps behind Blackwood. 2 base security officers appeared. Sergeant Rowan Sullivan and Corporal Everett Maddox. Both had been briefed by Blackwood 3 days earlier. Both knew exactly what they were walking into. "Gentlemen, hands where we can see them." Webb's hands curled into fists. "This is bullshit. She attacked us. We were defending ourselves." "Interesting," Blackwood said. "The video shows you grabbing her first, 11 seconds before I arrived. Would you like to revise your statement?" For a moment, Kira thought Webb would take the out, de-escalate, play the misunderstanding card. But men like Webb, men who'd built systems of intimidation over years, they always made the same choice when cornered: escalation. He lunged. Blackwood sidestepped. Minimal movement, maximum efficiency. Caught Webb's wrist mid-swing, rotated the joint, applied pressure, redirected momentum. 3 seconds. Webb hit the floor face first. Blackwood's knee in his back. Controlled, precise, no excessive force, just enough to neutralize the threat. "Article 128, Blackwood said calmly. "Assault of a commissioned officer." "Article 134, conduct unbecoming. Should I continue?" Cross and Wade didn't move. Smart choice. Sullivan stepped forward with restraints. "Staff Sergeant Webb, you're being detained pending investigation." "Investigation of what?" Webb spat. "Pattern of harassment, conspiracy to obstruct reporting, assault. And that's just tonight. We haven't discussed the past 5 years yet." Maddox moved toward Cross and Wade. "Phones, now." "You can't take our phones," Wade said. "Evidence seizure under Article 30 Investigation Authority," Maddox said. "You can surrender them voluntarily, or we can add obstruction to the list." Wade handed over his phone. Cross followed. Blackwood released Webb into Sullivan's custody, stood, looked at Kira. "Lieutenant Aldridge, you need medical evaluation?" "My wrist." He grabbed it pretty hard. "Sullivan, escort Lieutenant Aldridge to medical. Full documentation, photographs, written statement." Sullivan nodded. "Yes, Chief." Kira didn't move immediately, looked at Blackwood. "How did you know?" "Because this is what I do," Blackwood said, "and because you weren't the first person they targeted." Her eyes widened. "There were others." 7 transfers in 18 months, Blackwood said. 2 formal complaints, both buried. All female personnel. All within 60 days of assignment. All marked insufficient evidence. Why didn't anyone investigate? Someone did, Blackwood said. Starting 9 days ago. Someone else started 3 weeks ago without being asked. That was impressive work, Lieutenant. Webb laughed from his restraints. Bitter. Desperate. You think this changes anything? Command won't back you. They never do. Blackwood crouched down, eye level. Command didn't authorize this investigation. Deputy Inspector General did, under Defense Climate Protection Authority, which means your chain of command doesn't get a vote. Webb's face went from white to gray. You're bluffing. Blackwood stood, pulled a folder from his jacket, dropped it on the floor in front of Webb. Investigation authorization. Deputy IG seal. Command override authority. Read it when you get to detention. Sullivan and Maddox escorted all 3 men toward the detention wing. Their protests faded down the corridor. Kira remained. Blackwood could feel her watching him. Why did you install the emergency trigger? She asked. Because I read your file, Blackwood said. Top 15% of your OCS class. Perfect evaluation scores. Communications expert. Yet 3 weeks after arriving here, you requested transfer to a desk assignment in Maryland. I notice everything, Lieutenant. It's my job. What happens now? Now you go to medical. You give a statement. You do not minimize what happened. You do not protect anyone's reputation. You tell the truth. And then we compare notes, because I've been investigating for 9 days, and you've been investigating for 3 weeks. Between us, I suspect we have enough to end a lot of careers. She nodded slowly, started to leave, turned back. Chief Blackwood, yes? Thank you. He shook his head. Don't thank me yet, Lieutenant. This is just the beginning. At 600 hours, Blackwood stood in Colonel James Mitchell's office with 2 folders and a recording device. The base commander looked like he hadn't slept. Probably hadn't. Word traveled fast in military installations, even when people tried to keep it quiet. Colonel Mitchell, we need to discuss your command climate. Mitchell's jaw tightened. I've been briefed on the detentions. 3 personnel, harassment allegations, federal investigation. Chief Blackwood, I appreciate the IG's concern, but nothing, sir. Blackwood set the first folder on Mitchell's desk. Transfer records. 18 months, 7 female officers. Notice a pattern? Mitchell didn't open the folder. Personnel movements are routine. 7 women in 18 months. All filed harassment complaints before transferring. All investigated by Major Hartley. All closed within 72 hours with identical language. Insufficient evidence. That's not routine, Colonel. That's systematic. Major Hartley conducts thorough investigations. Major Hartley interviewed 0 witnesses in 7 separate investigations. Blackwood opened the folder himself, pulled out a document. Lieutenant Brianna Frost. Exit interview says seeking new opportunities. Her private journal, which she provided to the IG, says she was followed for 6 weeks by Staff Sergeant Webb and felt unsafe remaining at this installation. Mitchell's face tightened. That's Captain Gemma Caldwell. Official reason for transfer, family considerations. Actual reason, filed harassment complaint that your XO marked unsubstantiated without interviewing the 4 witnesses she provided. Want me to continue? Those are personnel matters. Those are command failures, Blackwood said, and they're about to become federal cases. The door opened. Major Hartley entered without knocking. Executive officer, second in command, the man who'd marked every complaint as insufficient evidence for 3 years. Colonel, I heard we have a situation. Perfect timing, Major. Blackwood turned slowly. We were just discussing your investigative methodology. Hartley's expression hardened. My investigations follow proper protocol. September 2023. Lieutenant Brianna Frost files complaint. You interview her once. Interview the 3 accused personnel. Close case in 2 days. You call that thorough? She provided no evidence. She provided witness names. You never contacted them. The witnesses weren't credible. You never spoke to them. How would you know? Hartley crossed his arms. I made a command decision based on available information. You made a political decision based on protecting reputation, Blackwood said. Frost transferred out 3 weeks later. Complaint buried. Problem solved. Except it wasn't solved. It metastasized. Mitchell stood. Chief Blackwood, I understand you have concerns, but... Concerns? Blackwood's voice cut like ice. Colonel, I have evidence. 18 months of systematic harassment. 7 victims identified so far. Multiple complaints buried. A command structure that prioritized appearance over accountability. This isn't concern. This is catastrophic leadership failure. The room went silent. Hartley recovered first. You're out of line. I'm federal authority conducting a climate investigation under Defense Climate Protection Authority. You want to explain what line I'm crossing? You're Navy. This is Army jurisdiction. Deputy IG authorized cross-branch investigation. Want to call him and verify? I'll wait. Hartley didn't move. Mitchell sank back into his chair. What do you want, Chief? Full access, all personnel files, all complaint records, all transfer documentation, all security footage from the past 2 years. That's months of data, Hartley protested. Then you better start compiling. Mitchell's voice was quiet. Chief, if we cooperate, what are we looking at? That depends on what we find. But Lieutenant Aldridge has already built a case that would make a federal prosecutor weep with joy. We're talking about unauthorized server access, encrypted criminal communications, conspiracy to obstruct reporting. And she did that in 3 weeks with just her communications expertise. Imagine what we'll find with full access. Hartley looked at Mitchell. The colonel said nothing. This is insane, Hartley said. You're destroying morale over a few disgruntled... Finish that sentence, Blackwood interrupted. I want to hear how you describe 7 women who were harassed off this installation. Hartley's mouth closed. That's what I thought. Blackwood turned to Mitchell. I need a conference room, secure, private. I'll be conducting interviews starting at 0900. Interviews with who? Mitchell asked. Everyone. At 0830 hours, Kira walked into the secure conference room Blackwood had requisitioned. She hadn't slept. Medical had documented the bruising on her wrist, taken photographs, collected her statement. Then she'd gone back to her quarters and pulled up every piece of data she'd collected over the past 3 weeks. Organized it, cross-referenced it with the patterns Blackwood had identified. Built something that looked less like a case file and more like a roadmap for dismantling an entire network. Blackwood was already there. 2 laptops, 3 encrypted drives, a secure phone, and enough coffee to fuel a small combat operation. Lieutenant, how's the wrist? Medical cleared me for duty. Documentation filed. Good. He gestured to a chair. Sit. We need to compare what we know. Kira pulled out her own encrypted drive. I've been monitoring unauthorized comm traffic for 3 weeks. Webb, Cross, Wade. But it's bigger than 3 guys at Sentinel Peak. How much bigger? She pulled up a network diagram on one of the laptops. 7 installations. Southwest region. Coordinated encrypted traffic patterns going back 5 years. Administrative access points that shouldn't exist on military servers. Blackwood studied the diagram. His expression didn't change, but Kira could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. You built this yourself? MIT Computer Science. Network security focus. This is what I do, Chief. This is what federal agents do after months of investigation with full resources. I had motivation, he smiled, grim. Lieutenant, when I read your file and saw you'd requested transfer to Maryland after 3 weeks here, I knew something was wrong. When I saw your grid redesign improved efficiency by 18% and Hartley dismissed it as nice work for a female officer. I knew exactly what kind of wrong we were dealing with. You've been watching me. I've been watching everyone. But you, Lieutenant Aldridge, you started hunting them before I even arrived. That emergency trigger I installed, you pressed it in a confrontation you engineered. You led them to a location you'd prepared. You documented everything. That's not victim behavior. That's investigator behavior. Kira met his eyes. They needed to be stopped. Agreed, which is why you and I are going to work together on this. I have federal authority and operational experience. You have technical expertise and evidence they don't know exists. Between us, we're going to dismantle this entire network. What's the next step? Next step is you brief me on everything you found. Then I brief you on the 7 victims who transferred out. Then we identify Captain Marlo Sinclair. Who's Sinclair? Someone who needs to hear that she was right 3 years ago, and that this time, we're actually going to do something about it. Captain Marlo Sinclair entered the conference room at 09:45 hours. 32 years old, operations officer, 7 years of service. She looked at Kira with the kind of recognition that came from shared experience. Looked at Blackwood with the kind of skepticism that came from watching the system fail. Captain Sinclair, thank you for meeting with us. Chief Blackwood, Lieutenant Aldridge, I heard about last night. Whole base is talking. I imagine they are, Blackwood said. Captain, we're investigating a pattern of harassment targeting female personnel at this installation. Your name appeared in the transfer records. Sinclair's expression hardened. Ancient history. 3 years isn't ancient, Kira said, and patterns that old matter when they're still active. Sinclair studied her. You're the one who trapped Webb. I'm the one who documented Webb's unauthorized network access and forced him into a confrontation with evidence in place. Yes. Smart. Necessary, Sinclair said. What do you want to know? Everything, Blackwood said, and Sinclair told them. 3 years ago, First Lieutenant, same installation, different commanders, filed a complaint with evidence, photos taken without her knowledge or consent, changing in her quarters, sleeping, personal moments captured and posted in a private group chat. Went to the investigator assigned to her case, Captain Kenneth Hartley, as he was ranked then. Hartley told her she was overreacting, said the men were just being friendly, suggested she was misinterpreting normal camaraderie. When she provided screenshots of the group chat and the photos, he said she couldn't prove who took them, said pursuing it would damage unit cohesion. Then he sent her an email. Sinclair pulled it up on her phone. 3 years old, still saved. Without concrete evidence of wrongdoing, pursuing this matter further may create unnecessary conflict. I encourage you to consider whether this environment aligns with your long-term career goals. Signed, Captain Kenneth Hartley. Dated November 14th, 2021. He threatened you, Kira said. He never used those words, but the message was clear. Drop it or face consequences. Did you drop it? Blackwood asked. I did, because I was 25 and scared and didn't know who to trust. The photos disappeared from the chat. The men involved got promoted. I got labeled as difficult. Why didn't you transfer? Because I was sick of running, so I stayed, kept my head down, built my career despite them, and I've watched 7 more women go through the same thing I did. Kira leaned forward. Captain, those photos. Do you still have the screenshots? Every single one, with timestamps and metadata. Can I see them? Sinclair pulled up the files. Kira studied them with the kind of focus that came from knowing exactly what she was looking for. The metadata's intact. EXIF data showing device information, geolocation, everything. She ran the EXIF data through a cross-reference program she'd built 3 weeks ago. 5 seconds later, she had a match. The device that took these photos 3 years ago was registered to Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb. Same serial number, same device he used to access the unauthorized server last week. Sinclair went pale. He's been doing this for 3 years? Longer, Blackwood said. The server Lieutenant Aldridge identified has data going back 5 years. Webb brought an existing operation with him when he transferred here. Then this isn't just Fort Sentinel Peak. No, ma'am, Kira said. This is Southwest region-wide. 7 installations, coordinated infrastructure. And you, Captain Sinclair, just provided the evidence that connects 3 years of operations to one perpetrator. Sinclair looked between them. What happens now? Now, Blackwood said, you make a statement, official, on record, everything you just told us. Will it matter? It's the difference between prosecuting 3 men and restructuring command. Sinclair smiled grimly. Then let's burn it down. By 1400 hours, Kira had built something that would make federal prosecutors compete for the case. Every piece of data from her 3-week investigation, cross-referenced with Sinclair's evidence from 3 years ago, mapped against the 7 transfer patterns Blackwood had identified. A timeline that showed systematic harassment protected by systematic cover-up, enabled by systematic institutional failure. Webb, Cross, Wade. That was just the visible layer. Underneath them, Major Hartley, conducting investigations designed to fail. Above them, someone coordinating across 7 installations. Someone with administrative access to military servers that even base commanders couldn't reach. Kira isolated the server logs, traced the administrative accounts, found 3, admin_01, Webb, local operations, the face of the network at Fort Sentinel Peak. Admin_02, unknown, but the access patterns showed command headquarters subnet, someone with privileged access to base infrastructure, someone who could bury complaints before they reached channels that mattered. Admin_07, unknown, regional level access patterns, Phoenix area, Southwest Regional Command Headquarters, someone coordinating across installations with the kind of authority that made junior officers disappear when they became problems. Chief, Kira said, we have a bigger problem. Blackwood looked at her screen. His expression went dark. 2 administrative accounts we haven't identified. Admin_02 is accessing from command headquarters. That means someone on Colonel Mitchell's staff. And admin_07? Regional Command, Phoenix. Whoever that is, they've been coordinating this network for 5 years across 7 installations. That's not just harassment, that's criminal enterprise. Blackwood pulled out his secure phone. Deputy IG needs to see this. Now. He made the call, put it on speaker so Kira could hear. Chief Blackwood, status. Sir, Lieutenant Aldridge identified 2 additional administrative accounts on the harassment server. 1 accessing from Base Command Headquarters, 1 from Regional Command in Phoenix. We're looking at institutional conspiracy, not just individual perpetrators. Silence on the line. Then, how solid is the evidence? Server logs, IP addresses, access timestamps, administrative credentials. Lieutenant Aldridge has 5 years of data documented with proper chain of custody. Send me everything. I'm authorizing expanded investigation, federal resources, full cybercrime support, and Chief, find out who admin_02 and admin_07 are. Yesterday. Copy that, sir. The line went dead. Kira stared at her screen, at the network diagram she'd built over 3 weeks, at the evidence that showed how deep the corruption ran. Chief, if admin_02 is command headquarters, that means someone close to Colonel Mitchell, which is why we're going to find them before they find us. 3 hours later, Kira's encrypted personal device received a message. No caller ID, no signature, just text. Stop the investigation or more people get hurt. She showed it to Blackwood. Trace it, he said. She did. 10 minutes of routing through proxy servers, following digital breadcrumbs, tracking IP addresses through military network infrastructure. The source materialized like a ghost becoming solid. Command Headquarters. Building 7. Captain's Office. She cross-referenced the subnet with personnel assignments. One name appeared, Captain Brennan Thorne, Colonel Mitchell's personal aide. 18 months in the position. Access to everything that crossed the commander's desk. Chief, admin_02 is Captain Thorne, Mitchell's aide. Blackwood's jaw clenched. You're certain? Threat originated from his workstation. I modified my response to include a tracking beacon. When he accessed my reply, I captured his digital signature. Server logs confirm he's had administrative access for 5 years. He's not just participating, he's coordinating the entire operation. Where is he now? Kira pulled up building access logs. He hasn't scanned into any building for the past 4 hours. Last location, Command Headquarters. Last action, logged out of all systems at 1347. He's running. Blackwood grabbed his phone. Base security. This is Chief Blackwood, Federal Authority. I need Captain Brennan Thorne detained immediately. Consider him a federal fugitive. Do not let him leave the installation. 5 minutes later. Chief, Thorne's vehicle isn't in the lot. Gate security has no record of him leaving. Checking secondary exits now. 10 minutes later. Chief, we found his car. Abandoned at a gas station 40 miles south. Security footage shows him getting into another vehicle. Black SUV, no plates visible, heading toward New Mexico state line. Blackwood ended the call, looked at Kira. You just exposed admin_02. 3 weeks of investigation, and you identified the coordinator of a 5-year criminal network. And now he's fleeing federal jurisdiction. State police will get him. But Lieutenant, you need to understand something. Captain Thorne was Mitchell's aide for 18 months. He had access to every complaint, every investigation, every transfer request. He knew exactly what to bury and how to bury it. Kira felt ice forming in her stomach, which means Mitchell either knew or was deliberately kept blind, which means we're about to find out if the base commander is complicit or just catastrophically negligent. Either way, his career is over. At 1800 hours, Colonel Mitchell assembled every officer above the rank of captain in the main conference room. 23 officers, all looking confused, all about to learn that their command structure had been protecting a criminal network for years. Gentlemen, ladies, we have a situation. That was how it started. The announcement that would change Fort Sentinel Peak forever. That would expose the rot at the heart of the command structure. That would force every officer to choose between protecting their careers and protecting their integrity. Blackwood stood beside Mitchell. Lieutenant Aldridge will brief you on what she discovered. Kira stood, pulled up her presentation, and for the next 90 minutes, she walked 23 field-grade officers through 3 weeks of technical investigation that exposed 5 years of criminal conspiracy. When she finished, the room sat in stunned silence. Then Mitchell spoke. Lieutenant Aldridge has built an airtight case. We're not just looking at base-level harassment. We're looking at regional criminal enterprise with institutional protection. Major Hartley, you're relieved of duty, effective immediately. And Part 1 ended with Kira Aldridge standing in front of the command staff, knowing that 24 years old and 3 weeks into an investigation, she just cracked a case that would end careers, send people to federal prison, and force the military to confront a truth it had been avoiding for years. Ready for Part 2? Blackwood asked quietly. Kira looked at the network diagram, still on the screen. At admin_07, still unidentified. At the 7 installations infected with this corruption. At the 62 victims who deserve justice. Ready, Chief. Let's finish what we started. The conference room filled with 23 officers at 1400 hours on day 1, and Colonel James Mitchell stood at the head of the table, knowing his career would be measured in hours now, not years. Chief Blackwood stood beside him, silent, watching. Federal authority made flesh. Gentlemen, ladies, as of 0400 this morning, 3 personnel were detained under federal investigation. Staff Sergeant Webb, Corporal Cross, Specialist Wade. But this isn't a briefing about 3 soldiers. This is about systematic failure that I enabled through willful negligence. The room shifted, officers exchanging glances. Major Hartley leaned forward from his position at Mitchell's right hand, playing the concerned executive officer perfectly. "Sir, I don't think we should discuss active investigations in open forum." "We're not discussing it," Mitchell said. "I'm announcing it. Chief Petty Officer Blackwood is conducting a climate investigation authorized by the Deputy Inspector General. He has my full support and unrestricted access. Any obstruction will be treated as interference with federal authority." Captain Rodriguez raised his hand. "Sir, what exactly are we investigating?" Mitchell looked at Blackwood. The chief warrant officer stepped forward, not asking permission, taking space like it belonged to him. "Pattern of harassment targeting female personnel. 18 months, 7 victims who transferred out, multiple buried complaints, and evidence suggests this isn't isolated to Fort Sentinel Peak." "Buried by who?" someone asked. Blackwood's eyes moved to Hartley. Didn't blink, didn't waver, just waited for everyone in the room to follow his gaze. Hartley's face flushed. "I conducted those investigations properly. Then you won't mind when Lieutenant Aldridge presents her analysis." Kira stood, 24 years old in a room full of field-grade officers, and her hands didn't shake when she pulled up the presentation on the main screen. 7 investigation files, side by side, color-coded for patterns. September 2023 through August 2024. 7 harassment complaints, all investigated by Major Hartley. Average closure time, 62 hours. Witnesses interviewed, 0. Evidence preserved, 0. Outcome language identical across all 7 cases. Insufficient evidence to proceed. She pulled up the actual reports, highlighted the phrases that repeated, word for word, like someone had created a template and just changed the names. Statistical analysis shows 0.003 probability of this occurring naturally. This isn't coincidence. This is protocol. Hartley stood. "Those investigations followed proper procedure. I made command decisions based on available information." Kira pulled up another screen. Lieutenant Brianna Frost provided 4 witness names in her September 2023 complaint. Your investigation notes state, "Witnesses not credible," but your contact log shows 0 attempts to reach any of them. How did you determine credibility without contact? "I assessed based on context." You assessed based on what you wanted the outcome to be. The room erupted. Half the officers defending Hartley, half demanding answers. Mitchell let it build for 10 seconds. Then his voice cut through like a blade. "Major Hartley, did you or did you not contact witnesses in these 7 investigations?" Hartley's jaw worked. "I made command decisions." "That's not an answer." "I determined witness contact wasn't necessary given the circumstances of each case." Kira pulled up another file. Captain Gemma Caldwell, December 2023. Complaint filed with photographs showing her being followed by the same 3 men over 6 weeks. Timestamps, locations, metadata. Your investigation closed in 48 hours with no witness interviews and no technical analysis of the photographic evidence. Why? The photos weren't conclusive. They showed 3 men following 1 woman across 14 documented occasions. That's stalking. That's harassment. That's a crime. And you closed it in 2 days. Captain Marlo Sinclair stood from her position in the middle of the room. 32 years old, 7 years of silence. Not anymore. "Major Hartley, 3 years ago I came to you with evidence. Photos taken without my consent, posted online, humiliating, violating. You know what you told me?" Hartley's face went white. "I don't recall the specific conversation." "I have the email." Sinclair pulled out her phone. Read directly from the screen. Quote, "Captain Sinclair, I understand your concerns, But without concrete evidence of wrongdoing, pursuing this matter further may create unnecessary conflict. I encourage you to consider whether this environment aligns with your long-term career goals." End quote. She looked up, met his eyes across the room. "That's not an investigation. That's a threat. You told me to leave or shut up. I chose to stay, and I watched 7 more women get the same treatment I got." The room went silent. Not the silence of confusion, the silence of recognition. Every officer present knew what they were hearing, knew what it meant. Mitchell's voice was quiet, controlled, final. "Major Hartley, you're relieved of duty effective immediately. Surrender your access credentials and report to legal counsel." "Sir, you can't just—" "I can. And Deputy Inspector General authority backs it. Badge and credentials. Now." Hartley didn't move. Rage and calculation warring on his face, trying to find an angle, a way to control the narrative. But Blackwood had positioned himself between Hartley and the door, and 2 base security personnel appeared in the doorway, like they'd been waiting for this exact moment. Sergeant Sullivan spoke first. "Major Hartley, please come with us." "This is insane. I served this base for 8 years. "And failed it for 3, Mitchell said. "Security, escort Major Hartley to legal holding. Ensure he has no access to computer systems or communication devices." Hartley slammed his badge on the table, looked at Mitchell with something between betrayal and hatred. "This isn't over." "You're right," Blackwood said. "It's just beginning. Because Lieutenant Aldridge has evidence that your cover-ups weren't just negligence. They were coordination, and we're going to prove it." The security detail escorted Hartley out. The door closed. 22 officers remained, looking at Mitchell, looking at Blackwood, looking at Kira, who was 24 years old and had just ended a field-grade officer's career with spreadsheets and server logs. "Dismissed," Mitchell said. "Except you, Lieutenant Aldridge. We need to discuss what comes next." The room cleared. Mitchell collapsed into his chair once the door closed. "Chief, Lieutenant, how bad is this going to get?" "Worse," Kira said, "because Major Hartley isn't the top, he's middle management." At 1800 hours, 800 personnel assembled on the main parade ground. Mandatory formation. Every soldier, every officer, every staff member who could be pulled from duty. Word had spread about Hartley's relief, rumors multiplying faster than command could contain them, and Colonel Mitchell stood on the platform, knowing he was about to make it exponentially worse. Kira stood at the edge of the platform, not center stage, support position, but close enough that everyone could see her, close enough that when Mitchell made the announcement, they'd know who'd built the case. Personnel of Fort Sentinel Peak, at ease. The formation relaxed, tension still crackling through the ranks like electricity before a storm. 18 hours ago, I learned something about this command that I should have known months ago. We have a systemic problem. Harassment, exploitation, abuse of power. And I enabled it through willful ignorance. You could hear 800 people holding their breath. In the past 18 months, 7 female officers transferred from this installation. I approved every transfer without question, without investigation, without caring why they were leaving. That was leadership failure, my failure. Someone in the back ranks shouted, "Sir, this is inappropriate for public forum." Mitchell's head snapped toward the voice. "You think acknowledging failure is inappropriate? You know what's inappropriate? 62 women being harassed while their command structure looked away." Gasps rippled through the formation. 62. Not 7. 62. This morning we detained 3 personnel. This afternoon we relieved Major Hartley of duty. By tonight we'll have identified 28 total perpetrators spanning 7 installations across the Southwest region. And every single person who saw something wrong and didn't report it shares responsibility. Kira stepped forward. Mitchell yielded the platform. Let her take center stage. Because this wasn't his story to tell, this was hers. "I'm Lieutenant Kira Aldridge. Communications officer, 24 years old. 3 weeks ago, I noticed encrypted traffic on military channels that shouldn't exist. I documented it. I analyzed it. I traced it. And I built a case that identified a criminal network using military infrastructure to systematically harass personnel across 7 installations over 5 years. She pulled up the network diagram on the formation screens. Visual representation of what she'd built. Names, connections, timeline, evidence. This wasn't 3 guys being inappropriate. This was organized crime, administrative accounts, encrypted servers, coordinated operations, and it existed because institutional protection made it possible. 15 women stepped forward from the formation, moving as one, standing together at the base of the platform. Captain Sinclair, Lieutenant Quinn Garrett, Private First Class Bryn McKenzie, 12 others, every current victim at Fort Sentinel Peak. Sinclair spoke first. 3 years ago, I reported harassment with evidence. Investigation closed in 3 days. Zero accountability. I was told to consider whether staying was right for my career. Garrett next. Webb's crew followed me for 3 weeks. Parking lots, gym, mess hall, always watching. I requested transfer to Germany because staying felt dangerous. Mackenzie last, 19 years old, youngest, voice shaking but words clear. I thought nobody would believe us, that we'd be called liars or troublemakers or worse. But Lieutenant Aldridge believed us. Then she documented it. Then she forced them into a confrontation with cameras recording. That's what changed everything. One by one, the other 12 gave their testimonies. Brief, powerful, undeniable. The formation absorbed it. Some faces showing shock, some showing guilt, some showing recognition because they'd known all along. Then Sergeant First Class Martin Cole broke ranks. 42 years old, combat veteran, 12 years service, respected by most of the base. He pushed through the formation and his voice carried across the parade ground. This is destroying careers over hurt feelings. Military isn't a safe space. If you can't handle pressure, get out. The formation split, half shouting Cole down, half nodding agreement, chaos spreading, and Kira let it build. Let the cultural divide show itself. Then she spoke and her voice cut through the noise with technical precision. Sergeant Cole, Specialist Wade's phone contained 47 videos. 17 involved women who were intoxicated or unconscious. That's not hurt feelings. That's federal sexual assault, documented with digital evidence admissible in court. Cole's face flushed. That's alleged. That's forensically verified. Staff Sergeant Webb operated a private server with content from 62 victims across 5 years. Some were 17 when initially contacted. Digital signatures, IP addresses, metadata, timestamps. This isn't accusation. This is evidence that would convict in any court in America. She pulled up examples on the screen, redacted for victim privacy, but clear enough to show what they were dealing with. Photos, messages, coordination between perpetrators, years of documented crimes. You want to defend that? Go ahead. But understand you're not defending good soldiers. You're defending predators who used military resources to commit federal crimes. Cole's mouth open, closed. He looked at the screens, at the evidence, at the timeline that showed systematic operations over years. And something shifted in his expression. Calculation becoming recognition, becoming shame. I need to see the full evidence. You'll see it at trial, Blackwood said from the platform, along with everyone else, because this investigation ends with prosecutions, not internal discipline. A captain from the 3rd rank spoke up. Chief Blackwood, how do we move forward from this? We stop protecting reputation and start protecting people. We investigate every complaint thoroughly. We interview witnesses. We preserve evidence. We hold perpetrators accountable regardless of rank. That's zero tolerance, someone said. That's basic leadership, Mitchell corrected. Cole shook his head. This is going to destroy unit cohesion. Captain Sinclair turned to face him. Unit cohesion was already destroyed. You just didn't notice because you weren't the target. We've been operating without cohesion for years. We just suffered in silence so you could maintain the illusion that everything was fine. The formation absorbed that, let it settle, and then something unexpected happened. Officers started stepping forward, self-reporting. Captain Williams first. I witnessed inappropriate behavior 6 months ago. Specialist Wade following Lieutenant Frost. I told myself it was coincidence. I didn't report it. That's on me. Then another, and another. 23 personnel total. All admitting they'd seen something and done nothing. All choosing accountability over silence. Kira watched it unfold. Watched the cultural breaking point happen in real time. Not everyone would change, but enough would. Enough to shift the majority. Enough to make predators think twice before operating in the open. Mitchell dismissed the formation at 1845 hours. 800 personnel dispersing. Some angry, some relieved. All affected. The old culture dying in public. The new one fighting to be born. Blackwood found Kira after the crowd cleared. Lieutenant, that was the most effective public briefing I've seen in 20 years. It was necessary. They needed to see the evidence, needed to hear from victims, needed to understand this wasn't rumor or politics. This was documentation. You're not done yet. We still have 2 administrative accounts to identify. Actually, Kira said, I know who admin_02 is. I just need to prove it conclusively. Day 2. Kira sat in the communications center at 0200 hours, running traces on the threatening message she'd received the previous afternoon. The digital breadcrumbs led exactly where she'd expected. Command headquarters. Captain Thorne's workstation. But she needed more than just the threat. She needed proof of administrative access. Proof of coordination. Proof that would hold up when Thorne inevitably claimed he'd been hacked or framed or any of the other defenses guilty people use when cornered. She pulled up 5 years of server logs, started cross-referencing every administrative action on the harassment server against base personnel schedules, looking for patterns, times when admin_02 accessed the server and times when specific base personnel were logged into military systems. 4 hours later, she had it. Perfect correlation. Every time admin_02 accessed the harassment server, Captain Brennan Thorne was logged into military networks at Fort Sentinel Peak. No exceptions. 5 years of data, hundreds of access events, and every single one matched Thorne's duty schedule down to the minute. More than that, she found the emails. Thorne coordinating with Webb. Thorne warning perpetrators when complaints were filed. Thorne providing advanced notice when investigators were scheduled to interview. 5 years of messages showing exactly how the protection system worked. At 0630 hours, she briefed Blackwood, showed him everything. Lieutenant, this is prosecutable. You just connected 5 years of cover-ups to one person. Gets better. I traced Thorne's communications patterns. He was reporting to someone. Regular status updates every 72 hours. Same encrypted channel. Same recipient. Admin_07. Yes, sir. And the message routing shows Phoenix, Southwest Regional Command Headquarters. We need Thorne in custody, now. But Thorne was already gone. By the time state police set up checkpoints, he was 40 miles south and switching vehicles. Running like people ran when they knew federal charges were coming. Running like people ran when they couldn't talk their way out anymore. State police found him at 1400 hours near Albuquerque. K-9 units tracked him through 2 miles of desert terrain after he abandoned the second vehicle and tried to escape on foot. He was carrying a laptop, 2 phones, and 3 flash drives, all of which he'd been attempting to destroy when officers closed in. Cybercrimes Division got the electronics at 1600 hours. By 1700 hours, they'd confirmed the bad news. Military-grade encryption with a 24-hour automatic wipe protocol. Timer started when Thorne entered custody. Biometric failsafe. If he didn't log in every 24 hours, the drives would erase themselves completely. The cyber team had until 1400 hours, day 3, to crack encryption that normally took weeks. At 1900 hours, day 2, Kira walked into the cyber forensics lab. The lead analyst looked exhausted, looked defeated. "Lieutenant Aldridge, we're throwing everything at this. Military AES 256 with custom modifications. We're not going to crack it in time." "Let me try." "Ma'am, with respect, we're certified cybercrimes investigators with..." "I've spent 3 weeks studying Thorne's patterns. I know how he thinks digitally. Let me try." The analyst looked at his team, looked at the clock, looked at Kira, stepped aside. She sat at the primary workstation, pulled up Thorne's server access logs from the past 5 years, started analyzing patterns, not the content, the metadata. When he logged in, how long he stayed connected, what times of day he preferred. Building a behavioral profile from digital exhaust. Standard passwords failed. Service dates, family names, call signs, all the obvious choices. But Kira wasn't looking for obvious. She was looking for arrogant. Because Thorne had operated for 5 years without getting caught. That kind of success bred confidence. Confidence bred patterns. She pulled up every message timestamp from Thorne's administrative account. 5 years of data points. Started looking for patterns in the numbers themselves. 07:15 hours, 14:07 hours, 22:30 hours. The same 3 times appearing over and over across 5 years. Not random, too precise, too consistent. She stared at the numbers, let her mind work. And then she saw it. Not times, coordinates. 71.5 degrees north, 140.7 degrees west, 2230 as a date indicator or time element. She cross-referenced against Thorne's service record. Alaska Ranger School. Graduated March 22, 2017. Arctic training course. Extreme conditions. The kind of experience that defined careers. The coordinates pointed to the exact training area. The date matched his graduation in military time notation. She tried the password. Ranger School _71.5 North _140.7 West _22nd of March 2017. The encryption broke. Every analyst in the room stopped what they were doing, stared at the screen as files started appearing. Years of evidence materializing like ghosts becoming solid. The lead analyst looked at the clock. 0347 hours, day 3. 47 minutes before the 1400 hours deadline that would have destroyed everything. "Lieutenant Aldridge, you just cracked military-grade encryption that should have taken us weeks. How?" "I know how networks think, and I know how arrogant people hide their arrogance in plain sight." Thorne thought he was clever using coordinates. He was, but he was also predictable. They downloaded everything. 5 years of administrative logs, communications with Webb and 27 other perpetrators, coordination messages, warning systems, evidence chains showing exactly how the network operated and who ran it. And buried in the administrative credentials, they found it. Admin _07. Full access logs. Digital signatures showing authentication from Southwest Regional Command. IP addresses traced to both the regional headquarters and a personal residence in Phoenix. Account maintenance logs showing 5 years of activity coordinating operations across 7 installations. The account holder, Brigadier General Donovan Stratton, Deputy Commanding General for the Southwest Region. 1-star general with 25 years of service, combat deployments, awards, reputation, and 5 years of running a criminal harassment network across multiple military installations. Kira called Blackwood at 0400 hours. Chief, I have admin_07. It's a general officer. Silence on the line. Then, you're certain? Digital signatures, IP logs, 5 years of evidence. Brigadier General Stratton. He's been coordinating this entire network from regional command. Send me everything. I'm calling the Deputy IG now. By 0800 hours, U.S. Marshals were mobilizing in Phoenix. By 1200 hours, they had arrest warrants signed by a federal judge. By 1800 hours, they were at Stratton's home in the suburbs, with news cameras that the Deputy IG had deliberately leaked to ensure public accountability. The arrest went exactly as scripted. Brigadier General Donovan Stratton, in civilian clothes, answering his door to federal agents. His wife watching from inside as they read him his rights. Handcuffs going on a general officer for the first time in recent military history. News crews capturing everything. The story went national within minutes. CNN breaking news banner. General arrested in military harassment network. MSNBC following with 62 victims, 5 years, Southwest region. Fox News. Brigadier General faces federal charges in sex abuse conspiracy. Military Times. Systematic harassment network exposed. General among 28 arrested. And in every story eventually, they mention the lieutenant who'd cracked the case. 24 years old. Communications officer. 3 weeks of investigation. Kira Aldridge's name entering the public consciousness, whether she wanted it there or not. At Fort Sentinel Peak, the base watched the news coverage in shocked silence. A general, not just base-level corruption, regional command conspiracy, and their communications officer had been the one to expose it. Kira sat in the conference room with Blackwood, watching the coverage, feeling the weight of what they'd built settling onto her shoulders. Lieutenant, you're going to get attention for this. Media requests, interview demands, people wanting to make you a symbol. I don't want to be a symbol, Chief. I wanted to do my job. You did more than your job. You dismantled a criminal network that operated for 5 years. You identified 28 perpetrators, including a general officer. You built a case that will result in federal prosecutions. That's not just doing your job, that's exceptional. It doesn't feel exceptional, it feels necessary. Both can be true. Her phone rang, unknown number. She answered anyway. Lieutenant Aldridge, this is Lieutenant Colonel Reynolds from Pentagon Public Affairs. We need to discuss media protocols for... She hung up. Not interested, Chief. You're going to have to deal with it eventually. Eventually, not today. Blackwood's phone buzzed. Text message. He read it. Looked at Kira. Deputy IG wants you at regional headquarters tomorrow for a formal briefing. Full investigation team. DOD senior leadership. You're going to present your findings to 2-star generals and civilian oversight. Can't you do it? They want the person who built the case. That's you, Lieutenant. You're the technical expert. You're the one who cracked the encryption. You're the one who connected 5 years of evidence. Kira closed her eyes, breathed, opened them. Fine, I'll brief them, but then I'm coming back here because Fort Sentinel Peak still needs a communications officer, and 62 victims still need to see this through to convictions. Agreed, but Lieutenant, you need to understand something. You're 24 years old and you just took down a general. That's going to follow you for the rest of your career. Then I better make sure it's a career worth following. The next morning, Lieutenant Colonel Vincent Calloway was arrested at El Paso International Airport trying to board a flight to Mexico. Deputy Installation Commander. Second in command at Fort Sentinel Peak, and according to the emails Kira had found on Thorne's laptop, the person who'd given Major Hartley direct orders to bury complaints. 3 messages over 3 years, all from Calloway to Hartley, all saying variations of the same thing. Minimize this. Better for everyone if it goes away quietly. Calloway had reported directly to Stratton. Chain of command conspiracy running from regional headquarters through base leadership, down to the investigators who made problems disappear. Institutional protection made concrete in email form. With Calloway's arrest, the investigation reached 28 identified perpetrators. Webb, Cross, Wade at the ground level, Thorne coordinating, Hartley covering up, Calloway directing, Stratton orchestrating from above, and 21 others spread across 7 installations, all connected through the server network that Kira had mapped 3 weeks ago. Federal prosecutors were building RICO cases, racketeering, conspiracy, federal sex crimes, distribution of illicit material, obstruction of justice, the kind of charges that carried decades in prison. At Fort Sentinel Peak, the cultural transformation was happening in real time, not smoothly, not without resistance, but happening. Sergeant Martin Cole requested a meeting with Kira on day 4. She agreed to see him in a neutral location. Conference room, door open, witness present. Cole looked older than he had at formation. Like 4 days of processing evidence had aged him years. Lieutenant Aldridge, I was wrong. I've spent 4 days trying to reconcile the man I served with in combat with what the evidence shows he did. What conclusion did you reach, Sergeant? That people compartmentalize. That someone can be good at their job and evil in their private life. That I defended Webb because I wanted to believe the version of him I saw in combat was the whole truth. It wasn't. No, ma'am, and I need to apologize. To you, to the 15 women who stood at formation, to everyone who heard me defend the indefensible. Kira studied him, looking for performance, looking for calculation, finding only exhaustion and shame. Apology noted. What are you going to do about it? Whatever you need. I'll testify at trials. I'll speak to other skeptics. I'll teach bystander intervention training. Whatever helps fix what I helped break through silence. I'll hold you to that. Cole stood, started to leave, turned back. Ma'am, one more thing. I've been in this military 12 years. I've seen good leaders and bad leaders. What you did? Building a case in 3 weeks while still doing your regular job? That's the best leadership I've seen. You didn't wait for permission. You didn't wait for someone else to fix it. You just fixed it. That's what we're supposed to be. He left. Kira sat in the conference room, feeling the weight of recognition. Not from rank, not from medals, from respect earned through competence and courage. The combination that mattered more than anything written on evaluation forms. That afternoon, a Pentagon courier delivered an envelope, official letterhead, orders inside. Effective immediately, Captain Kira Aldridge, battlefield promotion, 03, field promotion for exceptional service under combat equivalent conditions, dual assignment, communications director, Fort Sentinel Peak, climate reform liaison, DoD pilot program. Not a reward, a responsibility. The weight of systemic change landing on shoulders that were 24 years old and had barely finished unpacking from officer candidate school. Blackwood found her staring at the orders. Congratulations, Captain. I don't want congratulations. I want convictions. You'll get both, but the promotion is strategic. Captain rank gives you more authority to implement reforms. DoD wants you to design reporting systems that prevent this from happening again. You're not just investigating, you're rebuilding. That's a lot of pressure, Chief. That's command. Welcome to it. At 1900 hours on day 5, Kira stood in front of the full investigation team. Deputy IG present. DoD senior leadership on secure video feed. Civilian oversight representatives. Federal prosecutors. 20 people who would decide how this case proceeded and what changes would follow. She presented for 90 minutes. Technical evidence, network architecture, timeline, perpetrator hierarchy, victim testimonies. Every piece of the case laid out with the kind of precision that came from 3 weeks of obsessive documentation. When she finished, the Deputy IG spoke first. Captain Aldridge, in my 30 years with the Inspector General's office, I've never seen an investigation this thorough completed this quickly by someone this junior. You've built a case that will result in federal convictions and institutional reform. The question now is, what comes next? What comes next is making sure this never happens again, sir. How? And Kira told them. The system she designed over the past 4 days, encrypted reporting platform, automatic external oversight notification, blockchain-style evidence preservation, independent investigation triggers, everything she'd learned from watching the old system fail, inverted into a new system designed to succeed. She called it the Aldridge Protocol, named by the deputy IG over her objections, because institutions needed names, because reforms needed authors, because accountability required visibility. By the end of the meeting, DoD had mandated implementation across all Southwest region installations. 7 bases, 15,000 personnel. One system designed by a 24-year-old captain who'd spent 3 weeks mapping how predators thought and then built the infrastructure to stop them. The briefing ended at 20:30 hours. Kira walked out of regional headquarters knowing her life had changed permanently. She was Captain Aldridge now, the officer who took down a general, the one who built the protocol, the one who would spend the next years implementing reforms and testifying at trials and trying to make sure 62 victims got the justice they deserved. Blackwood was waiting outside. "How do you feel?" "Tired, overwhelmed, ready to go back to Fort Sentinel Peak and do my actual job." "Your actual job just became systemic reform." "Then I better figure out how to do it well." They drove back to Fort Sentinel Peak in silence, the desert landscape sliding past, the base appearing on the horizon. Home now, for however long the mission required, because Part 2 was ending. The network exposed, the perpetrators identified, the general arrested, the system broken open for everyone to see. But Part 3 was just beginning. The trials, the convictions, the implementation. The long, slow work of cultural transformation that would take years and might fail despite everyone's best efforts. Kira looked at the base as they approached, thought about the 15 women who'd stood at formation, thought about the 47 others across 7 installations who deserved the same vindication, thought about the next lieutenant who'd arrive at Fort Sentinel Peak and whether she'd face the same systems or something better. "Chief," she said, "we're not done." "No," Blackwood agreed. "We're just getting started." The federal courthouse in Albuquerque filled with spectators on a Tuesday morning in November, 8 weeks after the arrests. United States versus Marcus Webb, first trial, test case, 28 perpetrators waiting in holding cells across 3 states, watching to see if the evidence would hold, if the system would actually work this time. Kira sat in the witness preparation room, reviewing her testimony notes for the 6th time. Captain now, 30 days in rank, still getting used to the weight of it, still learning what it meant to be the person whose technical expertise would either secure convictions or watch guilty people walk free on technicalities. The prosecution attorney, a woman named Sarah Vance, with 15 years of federal experience, sat across from her, reviewing the evidence presentation one final time. "Captain Aldridge, they're going to attack your credentials. You're 24. You've been in service less than 2 years. Defense will argue you're not qualified to testify as an expert on network forensics or encryption analysis. I have MIT computer science degree with network security focus. 18 months securing military communications infrastructure. Army Signal School advanced courses in digital forensics. I'm qualified. I know you are, but be prepared for them to make you prove it on the stand. Don't get defensive, just state facts. Let your expertise speak through the evidence." "Understood." Vance pulled up the network diagram on her tablet, the one Kira had built over 3 weeks, color-coded, time-stamped, showing 5 years of criminal conspiracy in visual form. This is what wins the case, not the emotional testimony, not the victim's statements. Because this shows organization. This shows conspiracy. This shows RICO-level criminal enterprise. And you're the only person who can walk a jury through it. At 1,000 hours, Kira took the stand, swore the oath, sat in the witness box looking at 12 jurors who would decide if 5 years of evidence was enough, if technical forensics could overcome reasonable doubt, if a 24-year-old captain could convince them that what they were seeing wasn't just harassment, but systematic criminal conspiracy. Vance started gentle. Background questions, education, training, experience, building credibility brick by brick. Captain Aldridge, can you explain what you do as a communications officer? I maintain and secure the network infrastructure that enables military operations. Everything from radio frequencies to satellite uplinks to encrypted data transmission. If information moves on a military network, I'm responsible for ensuring it moves securely and legally. And in September of this year, you noticed something unusual? Yes, ma'am. Encrypted personal traffic on military channels. Unauthorized server access. 3 users routing private communications through infrastructure they weren't authorized to use. What did you do? I documented it. For 3 weeks, I collected packet captures, metadata, access logs, timeline data, built a case showing pattern and practice. Why didn't you report it immediately? Because I needed proof. Individual instances could be explained away, but 3 weeks of data showing consistent, unauthorized access, that's not mistakes. That's intentional misuse of military resources. Vance pulled up the network diagram. Can you explain this to the jury? Kira stood, approached the screen, let her expertise take over. This is a visual representation of the harassment network. 5 years of operations across 7 military installations. The red nodes are administrative accounts, 3 of them. Admin 01, operated by Staff Sergeant Webb. Admin 02, operated by Captain Thorne. Admin 07, operated by Brigadier General Stratton. The blue nodes are perpetrators, 28 total. The green lines show communication patterns. The timestamps show coordination. She walked through it methodically, how she'd traced IP addresses, how she'd analyzed metadata, how she'd cross-referenced server access logs with duty schedules to prove who was behind which account. Every technical detail explained clearly enough that non-experts could follow, but precisely enough that experts couldn't poke holes. 40 minutes of testimony, the jury paying attention, taking notes, following the evidence from initial discovery through network mapping, through encryption breaking, through final identification. Captain Aldridge, you stated you broke military-grade encryption in 11 hours. How? Behavioral analysis. Captain Thorne had operated for 5 years without getting caught. That level of success creates patterns. I analyzed 5 years of his digital behavior, found that he logged into the harassment server at 3 specific times repeatedly. 0715 hours, 1407 hours, 2230 hours. Those numbers look like coordinates. 71.5 north, 140.7 west. Alaska Ranger School training area where Thorne graduated March 22, 2017. Use that as his password. The encryption broke. One juror audibly gasped. Another was nodding. They were getting it, understanding that this wasn't guesswork. This was expertise applied with precision. Then the defense attorney stood for cross-examination. Marcus Webb's civilian lawyer, a man named Gerald Foster, with a reputation for aggressive tactics. Captain Aldridge, you have a computer science degree from MIT. Impressive. But you're not formally trained as a cybercrimes investigator, are you? I'm trained as a network security specialist. I secure military communications against hostile intrusion. That requires the same technical skills as cybercrimes investigation. But you're not certified by any federal law enforcement agency as a forensic examiner, correct? I'm certified by the Army Signal School in digital forensics. My role requires me to investigate unauthorized network access as part of my duties. You're 24 years old. How much real-world experience do you have? 18 months securing communications for 15,000 personnel across multiple operations, during which I've investigated 43 security incidents, identified 12 unauthorized access attempts, and maintained 0 successful breaches of systems under my protection. Foster changed tactics. Captain, isn't it true you engineered the confrontation on September 20th? You deliberately led my client into a situation where you could accuse him of assault? I confronted Staff Sergeant Webb about unauthorized server access. That's within my authority as communications officer. He chose to respond with physical assault. That was his decision, not mine. But you planned it. You reactivated cameras. You brought federal oversight. You set a trap. I documented a crime. Then I created conditions where perpetrators would expose themselves with evidence recorded. That's not entrapment. That's investigation. Investigation? You're not a trained investigator. I'm a trained analyst. I analyze networks. I identified unauthorized activity. I documented it. I reported it through proper channels. That's exactly what my training and position require me to do. Foster tried for another hour, attacking her credentials, her age, her methods. But every attack just gave Kira another opportunity to explain the evidence, to walk the jury through technical details, to demonstrate that she knew exactly what she was talking about. When Foster finally sat down, Vance stood for redirect. Captain Aldridge, the defense suggests you're not qualified, but the encryption you broke, how long would it typically take trained federal cybercrimes investigators? Prosecution consulted with FBI Cybercrimes Division. They estimated 2 to 4 weeks with their standard tools and methods. You did it in 11 hours. Yes, ma'am. Because? Because I understood the behavioral patterns. Because I'd studied Captain Thorne's digital fingerprints for 3 weeks. Because technical expertise isn't just about tools. It's about understanding how networks think and how people hide in them. The jury got it. Kira could see it in their expressions. They weren't just listening to testimony. They were watching an expert explain her craft. And the defense's attacks had only made her expertise more credible. Vance had one final question. Captain, in your professional opinion, based on your analysis of 5 years of server logs and network traffic, was this organized criminal activity? Yes, ma'am. Administrative hierarchy, encrypted communications, coordinated operations across multiple locations, evidence preservation and distribution, warning systems when investigations started. This wasn't individuals acting independently. This was criminal enterprise with infrastructure, coordination, and institutional protection. Thank you, Captain. No further questions. The trial continued for 6 more days. Victim testimony, technical evidence, digital forensics. But Kira's testimony had established the foundation. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, came back with verdicts on all counts. Guilty. Every single charge. Article 120 violations, conspiracy, obstruction, federal sex crimes. Marcus Webb facing 18 to 25 years in federal prison. 27 more trials would follow over the next 8 months, all using the same evidence, all building on the same foundation, and every single one would end in conviction. Because Kira had built a case that couldn't be dismantled. Because the evidence was overwhelming. Because 62 victims had finally found a system that worked. 3 months after the first conviction, Fort Sentinel Peak had changed in ways both visible and subtle. New commander, Colonel Declan Ashford, 25 years of service, reputation for cultural reform. First meeting with Kira had lasted 2 hours. Him asking questions, her providing answers. Both of them understanding that rebuilding command climate would be measured in years, not months. The Aldridge Protocol had been implemented at all 7 Southwest Region installations by December. Encrypted reporting system, anonymous submission capability, automatic external oversight notification. Every complaint now triggered independent investigation within 24 hours. No more internal cover-ups. No more cases closed without witness interviews. No more insufficient evidence findings that protected predators. In the first 90 days, the system processed 89 reports across 7 installations. 63 substantiated, 26 personnel removed, 0 cover-ups, 0 retaliation cases. The numbers told the story. People were reporting because they believed the system would actually work. Kira taught the implementation training herself, flew to all 7 installations, briefed command staff, trained communications officers, answered questions, built institutional knowledge that would survive after she moved on. At Fort Carson, a major asked the question everyone was thinking. Captain Aldridge, what happens when attention fades? When leadership changes? When people forget why these protocols exist? The system remembers. Every report is logged with external oversight. Every investigation is monitored by independent parties. Every outcome is documented in databases that command can't access or modify. Institutional memory built into the infrastructure. They can't forget what the system won't let them erase. But teaching protocols was the easy part. The hard part was mentorship. The 15 female junior officers who met in Kira's conference room every Thursday evening. Not therapy, professional development. Learning the same skills Kira had used. Digital forensics, evidence documentation, network security, leadership under pressure. Lieutenant Quinn Garrett had become her assistant instructor, teaching others what Kira had taught her. The knowledge spreading, multiplying, creating layers of protection that didn't depend on one person being exceptional. Private First Class Bryn McKenzie, 19 years old and the youngest victim, had enrolled in Signal School, studying communications, planning to build a career on technical expertise, learning to be the kind of officer who could protect others because she understood the infrastructure better than the people trying to abuse it. The transformation wasn't universal. 30% of the base still defended the convicted perpetrators, still believed the investigations were political, still thought 62 victims were lying or exaggerating or using victimhood for advancement. Cultural change was never complete, never unanimous, but it was happening, measurably, documentably, in ways that created momentum. Sergeant Martin Cole had become an unexpected ally, teaching bystander intervention training, speaking to skeptics about how he'd been wrong, how he defended evil because he couldn't reconcile good performance with bad character. His testimony at Webb's trial had been powerful. A senior NCO admitting failure, choosing accountability over ego, the kind of courage that changed more minds than any policy directive could. In January, 6 months after the initial arrests, something happened that tested whether the reforms were real or performative. Second Lieutenant Sloan Merrick, 23 years old and brand new to Fort Sentinel Peak, submitted a report through the Aldridge Protocol. 2 male NCOs, following her off duty, inappropriate comments, intimidation patterns, the same warning signs that had marked every previous case, the same behavior that had been allowed to escalate for years. This time was different. The report triggered automatic protocols at 1400 hours on a Tuesday. External oversight team deployed by 1600 hours. Independent investigation began by 1800 hours. Both NCOs were isolated from Merrick within 2 hours of the report. No retaliation, no witness intimidation, no command interference. 72 hours later, the investigation concluded. Both NCOs substantiated for harassment, removed from the installation. No appeal to chain of command. No quiet transfer to another base. Actual consequences. Immediate, public, irreversible. This was the proof, the moment that validated everything. 1 year ago, it took 5 years for Webb's network to be exposed, 3 weeks for Kira to build the case. Now, 72 hours from report to resolution. The system worked. Not because Kira was watching, Not because Blackwood was investigating, because the infrastructure she'd built made accountability automatic. Lieutenant Merrick was the 63rd victim, but unlike the 62 before her, she didn't suffer for years. She didn't transfer to escape. She didn't sacrifice her career for safety. She reported. The system responded. Justice delivered. That was the validation Kira had been building toward. Not catching predators, making it impossible for them to operate. The Aldridge Protocol wasn't revenge, it was prevention. And it worked. Kira met with Merrick after the investigation closed. The young lieutenant looked exhausted, but relieved. Captain Aldridge, I almost didn't report. I thought it would be my word against theirs. I thought command would protect them. But the system worked, exactly like you said it would. The system works because people like you use it, because you documented everything, because you reported through protected channels. You did everything right, Lieutenant. What happens to them? Administrative separation with prejudice, dishonorable discharge, federal records that follow them. They won't serve again. And every command in the region knows why. That's accountability. Merrick nodded slowly. Thank you for building this, for making it possible to report without destroying my career. You protected your career by reporting, by refusing to suffer in silence. That's what's different now. Silence used to be survival. Now accountability is survival. The culture flipped. The metrics validated what Kira could see on the ground. Fort Sentinel Peak, 1 year post-investigation. Female retention rate up 45% year over year. Harassment reports up 310%, but average resolution time down to 68 hours. Substantiation rate, 67%. Command climate surveys showed 71% positive response, up from 34% before the investigation. The numbers meant survivors, meant careers that continued instead of ending, meant professionals who could focus on their jobs instead of documenting harassment, meant the institutional failure had been replaced with institutional accountability. Not perfect, not universal, but better, measurably better. In March, 9 months after the investigation began, Blackwood received orders for his next assignment. Fort McKenzie, Montana. Same mission, different base. Another command climate that needed assessment. Another pattern of failures that needed exposure. Kira organized the send-off. Formation at 0900 hours. 80 personnel present, officers and enlisted. The core group who'd made the transformation possible. Colonel Ashford presented Blackwood with a commendation. Joint Service Achievement. Language about exceptional federal military cooperation. About investigations that changed institutional culture. After the formation cleared, Kira found Blackwood in the parking area, loading his vehicle, preparing for the next mission. Chief, you're leaving us in good shape. I'm leaving you in command, Captain. There's a difference. Fort Sentinel Peak doesn't need me anymore. It has you. And the 15 officers you've trained. And the protocols that make accountability automatic. My job here is done. What about Fort McKenzie? Same patterns, different names. 7 female transfers in 14 months. All complaints marked insufficient evidence by the same investigating officer. Deputy IG wants me to assess. You're going to find the same thing we found here. Probably, but that's the mission. Find the rot. Expose it. Let people like you fix it. Then move to the next base. Kira handed him a folder. Analysis of Fort McKenzie's network traffic for the past 6 months. I've been monitoring it as part of my regional communications director responsibilities. You have 3 unauthorized encrypted servers operating on their military networks. Administrative access patterns suggest command-level protection. Same signatures we saw here. Blackwood opened the folder, read the first page, looked at Kira with something between respect and amazement. You've been investigating Fort McKenzie remotely? I've been monitoring all 7 Southwest region installations. That's my job now. Regional Communications Director means I see everything, and I recognize the patterns. Fort McKenzie has the same infrastructure we dismantled here. So does Fort Huachuca. So does White Sands Missile Range. Different networks, same design. You're telling me this is wider than we thought. I'm telling you Webb's network was Southwest region-wide. We took down the Fort Sentinel Peak node, but the infrastructure still exists at 4 other installations, just with different administrators, different perpetrators, same system. Blackwood sat on his tailgate, processed what she was telling him. You've built cases against 4 more installations? I've built evidence maps. You'll need to do the investigations, but I can tell you where to look, who to watch, what patterns to expect. You won't need 9 days of reconnaissance at Fort McKenzie. You can start on day 1 with targets already identified. Captain Aldridge, you just turned 1 investigation into 5. You understand what that means? It means we're not done. It means the mission continues. It means every victim at those 4 installations deserves the same accountability we delivered here. And you're going to support all of it. That's why they made me Regional Communications Director. I see the networks. I map the patterns. I identify the threats. You provide the federal authority